Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. Let me give a shout out to Malika for coming through on the Cash App, and to S. Jock for coming through on both Cash App and with the news, and Senor Kanga for coming through with news. I open as many of the links as I possibly can. I'm very behind in the emails, and I probably will be for a while. Got a few days to spend with my wife, and we still have to move before I have to actually start traveling. I have an important trip to make. With that being said, darknesses, I'm going to point out to you some hypocrisy. One of the types of hypocrisy is that there are these ladies that are turning to men who are getting sex dolls, and they have arguments with them. And of course, these are online. And I don't promote sex dolls because, well, I'm not allowed to promote something like that as a Muslim, but we have to admit that whenever a man purchases it, the sin of that falls on not only him, but on some of the ladies around as well, not necessarily for not preferring that particular man, but for being a worse deal, even for normal men, than a sex doll. See, one woman sat up and actually said, and shouts out to Imam Saad, or Saad Imam out of San Antonio, because he posted this. But she said, these dolls can't clean and they can't cook. So how are they better than us? And a man replied to her and said, so now that these things exist, you want to put cooking and cleaning on the table, huh? Because see, Cardi B did say, I don't cook and I don't clean, but let me tell you how I got this ring. And it turned out she was lying. Or they were just lyrics not to be taken seriously for a song, and she wasn't lying. She was just entertaining in a fictitious manner. Whatever the case is, she became the face and the voice of lines by which she does not live. That's what happened. I did not understand that. I did not understand that as fast as someone else did. I read it, but it should have jumped into my head before I looked down and saw the response. But I read the response before I thought of that response. And granted, the man who responded read her post before I ever saw the screenshot of it. So I'm not upset that he posted it first. I'm upset that I didn't see the reply in my head before I looked down the screen and saw the reply. Every single thing that is a benefit to you in a marriage is exactly what you were told they will not do. And if they will, you are not entitled to it. But everything that is a benefit to them in a marriage, you are responsible for providing, even if you just don't have it. This is the orientation from which I've come. This is how I've grown up. And this was all subconscious and understood and not talked about. If you're the man, you owe, but you're never owed. So sometimes younger guys that are younger than me, at least, will sit up and say, well, man, you make it sound like it was really bad, Black Man. I didn't have it that bad. Well, that's because, see, when I was coming up, I could see these things, but I could not articulate everything. And when I could articulate something, other men could not accept that I was right and they were wrong. They were always accepting these bad deals from women in the interest of getting some draws. They were told that that's the goal, get the draws. And the women didn't say get the draws as a goal, but the women did say, oh, wait a minute, you ain't get the draws, or why not? Because if don't no other B want you, then I don't need. That's how they were. And we subconsciously could understand something was wrong. you are now looking at a younger generation, or actually two younger age groups of men who, for whatever reason, are able to think much more clearly than we were. And they can see through the BS. So when we want to sit up and say that that's the generation that has no work ethic and they whine and they complain, and there are times that they do about certain things, I will admit, we are also having to admit that these young men are able to see through the gender games, the women's games, the hyenas games more clearly than we are. You don't get to tell us you don't have to cook, you ain't got to clean, you don't even know how to do them things, and you shouldn't have to know how to do them things. But then if an artificial woman replaces you, you got a problem. We don't do stuff like that here. We don't accept hypocrisy when we can detect it. But we were trained in my age group to not detect it. And the men older than me were trained to not detect it. The messages were so mixed for my age group growing up that we could not really make sense out of it. So if you were one of those guys that women just didn't pick, didn't select, then you were castigated as soon as somebody noticed it. You were blamed incessantly, because why the hell not? I mean, after all, here you were. You weren't being chosen. You weren't being picked. When were you going to be picked? You're supposed to be picked at some point. Some lady's supposed to take an interest in you. Why has none of them taken an interest in you? And if they don't take an interest in you, then you're 9AY. That becomes a suspicion. And if you don't say it out loud, it still becomes a thought. And you can imagine what some of the jokes were. The first summer, the summer after my freshman year at Morehouse, when I went back to my hometown to visit. Now, I only had a few weeks there before the next school year started, but I knew to expect some of the jokes from some of the sistering, and I did. I did hear some of them. Oh, were you one of them dudes? I'd have to say, B word, are you crazy? Other men had it about as bad, depending on where they were and who they were. But now the hypocrisy is something that these younger men are able to see through for the most part, at least from what it looks like. And that's why I started the SIAS series on my Buy Me a Coffee. No, I'm not putting it on YouTube for free. You could support and buy me you can buy me one coffee per se, and then you can see them for about the first 24 to 36 hours that they're up, like my other post on there. Or you could become a recurring subscriber, and then you will see these SIAS into perpetuity. Every so often, I come across something someone wrote somewhere or said, or I think of it on my own. And it is a sermon in a sentence, SIAS, and then I will post them on there from now on. You are not required to go through this on your own without the support of other men, and you're not required to expose yourself in a way that you might be considered or accused of being a bitchless 9AY either. Now with the net, we use social media in order to trade information and to learn certain things. Social media has been actually what has blown the lid off of a lot of the games that the Western niches play. Now, accountable commentary will tell you stay away from Keisha, and I agree. In the West, I agree. He says it doesn't matter what country she's in. That's where he and I would differ, because neither of us can know every country. But I also say stay away from Becky. I tell you stay away from whoever thinks that the West is right. See, my wife spent part of her childhood in the West, but she doesn't like that. She doesn't like the orientation that it gave, and she herself has stated, I'm so glad I don't live in the West anymore. That's my wife. Some others, unfortunately, I've had to sit back and watch and see that some others whose parents were not raised in the West raised them in the West. And they did not pick up the traditional values of their parents except for what the man has to do. But when it came down to what the woman must do in exchange, they did not care. They did not respect that. They were done with that. That's old fashioned. That's from the old world. We're not taking that with us over here. I'm an American. You're not going to run that on me. That's how they were. So they took the worst of both and the best of neither because that's what suited them. From their standpoint, they were taking the best of both and the worst of neither, not caring what that meant for the man. And that's how you know that the West teaches women to not only not care for the man, but to actually care against the man. That's why I have this anxiety still on your behalf, seeing the war in which you are. Because you see, I live in places where it's an even exchange between the men and the women. It's not right off the bat, you've got to sit up there and do all the suffering, and they don't ever have to. I look at my wife and I see what we have, and I know what the issues are, but I see the good that we have. And I think to myself, goodness gracious, man. How many guys in the West will never get to find? For me, I was above 40 when she and I met. And when we first met, I didn't know she was single. And she didn't know that I was going to be soon. That's what it is between us. I was already 40. Was jacked up, man. I look at it, I was actually older than that. But that's how long it took me to find her, because I grew up in the West. And when I met her, I'd been 3 years and some months in the kingdom. That's what the hell it took. Before her, my second wife was also a good wife to me while we were married. I'm sure she's still a good person if she's still alive. I was in my late 30s when I was introduced to her. Every single time before that, be it a marriage, dating, trying to date, trying not to date, or a platonic friend telling me about other dudes, every single time before that, there were games. And at the very least, there was deception in the form of omission, if not commission, either outright lies or information kept away from me. And I'm not concerned with why. I don't care about why. The experiences, the romantic experiences, were not generally, now there were peaceful ones, but they were not generally good romantic experiences. They weren't even a mix of good and bad. There was usually something I knew that I had to tolerate that other men didn't. And that didn't even always involve being part of a couple. And a lot of guys my age wound up having to deal with this, not as many as the guys in the younger age groups. Most of you in the younger age groups, those that are now in your 30s and younger, most of you have had to deal with this. And you've had to deal with it again and again and again and again and again. And truth be told, when you start to be honest on social media and you let other men know what it is you had to deal with, even if you don't say who you are, when you let other men know, so that they understand that they're not just they're not the oddball out, that there's not just something about them that magically makes all women agree to treat them badly. There's still something else that's going to come out. When the women see these things on social media, when they see these posts from these men, this is what's going to happen. They're going to say, well, if this is how other women are treating this guy, and other guys are saying they've been treated the same way, then I'm not going to treat these men any better. So I'm going to actually turn my treatment of men worse than what it is now. That's not your fault. Go ahead and say it anyway. The other thing I want you gentlemen to understand is that most of you are going to be single the whole time that you live in the West. And if it's your whole life, it'll be your whole life. Not that I want that. But understand that it will be the case if you simply just apply standards to them the way they apply them to you. Just by you having comparable standards, fair standards for them to meet based on the ones that you have to meet in exchange. Just that you insisting on playing the game fairly is enough. If you do that, you will be single. Do it anyway. That's what I wanted you to understand, gentlemen. Do it anyway. I have to tell you this because the hatred is so deep in the West. The misandry is so deep that even the ones that are still innocent kids right now at this point might not be capable of not learning this hatred and contempt as they get older. The mechanisms that pass this down from generation to generation might last another generation. They might last another two. So while they are innocent now, if they're that young, they still may inevitably wind up picking up the same misandry because it's also subconscious. And then they become more aware of it as they get older. And there may be nothing that any of us can do to put a stop to that. But the thing is this, if you're going to be by yourself, no options, and it is not your fault, then at the very least, you do have the capacity to live that way, if it is a must for your safety. And the other thing too is that it also was going to mean for them that to them it's also going to mean that they don't have anybody. They're only going to have each other. And while they may be glad to turn to some of them who sort of become men in order to replace the men that are shutting them out now, that does not change the fact that they don't have you. Because I can tell you now, a lot of these studs are not necessarily trying to do the same work that cis men do. Still ain't trying to do that. They might want to take on those warrior hairstyles, but they're not trying to do those same jobs, the same type of work. And I don't blame them for that. I don't hold that against them. Those are jobs I wouldn't want to do unless I'm going to be paid a fortune to do them. And in a country like where I live, I'm not going to be paid even well to do those jobs. So no. So with that in mind, you guys are going to have to go ahead and prepare for that. But know that in actuality, you're not losing. Winning the game now, because they rigged the one that they're trying to encourage you to so-called win. Winning that game is different. You see, winning that game means that you have to appeal to them and get their validation, the same validation they're told to withhold and to not give you, even if you have earned it, according to their own rules and standards. That's their game. Don't do that. The real way to win the real game is that you keep yourself safe. And as AC has said, you stay Keisha free. But the real way to win that real game is not just that you stay Keisha free. It is that you stay Westernisha free. It is that you stay completely out of range of her false accusations, her lies, her paternity fraud, the plausibility of her taking you for half of any resources. And that won't even always involve or demand an outright legal marriage either. Keep that in mind as well, too. All of these things. The real way to win it at this point is to do what Lion of MGTOW has talked about doing. And to be honest with you guys, I'm going to tell y'all straight away, too, that it may involve taking on a sense of style that is not very stylish, nor is it ridicule worthy, but it just makes you invisible. You stack your resources and you save up while you are invisible to them. And the guys that are simps and panderers are the ones whom you tell or you encourage to go ahead and, yeah, man, get that number, player. Yeah, man, get them draws, player. Yeah, man, you go ahead and do that, player. Make a tape for the rest of us because they want to simp and pander. You encourage them so that maybe they wind up being the ones that get stuck with the paternity fraud or the child support or alimony or vaginamony, meaning they don't even have to be married to be on the hook for this stuff. Walaikum salam. Kemunachin. Eid Mubarak. Abartekwe bahalo laglo. All right, so yeah, I had to greet my neighbor. So I wanted you guys to know that that's really the way that you win the game. You become invisible. You encourage other men to be the distraction. You let them be on the hook for these things that these women want to do to them. And you blend in with the wallpaper while you stack. And then when you're able to leave, you vanish. You learn skills that would allow you to work remotely. Make this the long-term goal of most of you. You'll be okay. That's the best way to go about it. That's the game you can actually win. And you win that game by stealth. So with that being said, I hope that this benefits you. And I mean that from the bottom of my black heart and from the depths of my black mind. Thank you all for listening. And as always, black heart, black mind, blackout, assalamu alaikum, black heterosexual, non-select male power because they don't like it, and black patriarchy until extinction or judgment day. Thank you for flying with us here, Jet Black Airways, with the phrase jet black is also a verb. Keep jetting black with us until the wings and the wheels fall off. Gender justice forever.